Parkcast, the UK's original theme park podcast.
Well, I didn't expect to see you here again. Hi, I'm Bex, and this is Parkcast. We were last here in 2020, that year when everything went a bit crazy, all the parks shut down, and so did we. Because the park shut down, we had no parks to go and visit, no parks to go and talk about. So Parkcast, the podcast, stopped. But we're back. If you are new here, we are a podcast for theme park fans. We love theme parks. We love roller coasters. We love chatting about them. And we're back for 2024. It's going to be a big year for the UK theme park industry. So we thought we'd come back. And this year, we're going to be getting you even closer to influential people in the theme park industry. It's going to be so exciting. We've got some amazing guests lined up for you. So do stick with us. Come along for the ride. I have to, though, introduce you to someone new, someone who's not been on Parkcast before. My new co-host, it's Kev.
Hi, Bex, you all right?
Welcome to Parkcast.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and I can't wait to get chatting about theme parks and everything.
You are very welcome here. We love theme park fans, and you are a big one. I know we haven't known each other this long, but I do know you absolutely love theme parks. How long have you been into them for? How much of an enthusiast are we talking here on the scale of 0 to super geek?
Oh, well, I think everyone that would know me would tell you that I am a super geek when it comes to theme parks. I've been going to theme parks since I was a kid. My parents took me all over the country. We visited lots and lots of different theme parks of different sizes. But I remember going to Alton Towers in 1994 for the first time, and that was kind of when it really took off.
The year of Nemesis.
The year of Nemesis. And I even remember standing by Nemesis with my dad and saying to him very clearly, saying, "Oh, you'll never get me on that," as an 8-year-old. And then never realised years later that it become one of my all-time favourite roller coasters. So, I've just kind of grown up with theme parks, and I just love being immersed by them, and I love visiting different parks, going on different roller coasters, different rides, and it's a big passion of mine for sure.
Well, you are new to Parkcast, so we need to find out a little bit about you. What would you say? We do a bit on the show which we call Just Gotta Ride It, which is where we ask our guests to narrow it down to their favourite roller coaster. If they could only ride one for eternity, every other roller coaster is about to be destroyed, which one would you save? Which is the one that we've all got to get out there and ride, in your opinion?
Oh, well, I mean, I knew this question was coming, and the problem is there's just so many to choose from, and I know that I don't want to sound really boring with my answer as well, but as it is new, in inverted commas, new, I'm going to have to go with Nemesis Reborn, basically, because like I was feeling like, well, if I just say Nemesis, it's like, oh, this is such an obvious answer, but actually I can be the first person to say Nemesis Reborn on here, because it is new, again, inverted commas, new. Just the way that they've done it, and the theming, the music, the atmosphere around it. I think it's such a great coaster that's been added to in such an incredible way. My other roller coaster I thought about, and again, I'm not
you're breaking the rules already here.
I'm not giving it
one coaster.
No. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, because I know in an interview coming up, somebody happens to mention a coaster I'd also thought about, but I don't want to say that one because, again, it might spoil what's coming up later. But I'm going to stick with Nemesis, and I think everyone at some point should ride that roller coaster now that it's been updated and see it. And the whole of Forbidden Valley as well, not just Nemesis itself, but that whole area as well, I think, is worthy of being up there, definitely. Sorry, that's a boring answer. But
there's no such thing as a boring answer on Parkcast. It's a good choice. And nicely teased ahead to our special guest interview for the podcast today, which we will come on to, but he's a big one. He is a big one. Right, good. Enjoyed that. We are, of course, going to get to know you more as we do more episodes, and we'll find out a bit more about you and your likes and your dislikes and things like that.
Of course.
But before we get into this big interview, this our huge guest who we've got for our first episode back of the series, we've got to chat about a few things that are going on in the UK theme
Just a
park
few. There's quite a few. There's quite a few things.
It's huge. It's mad this year, and that's kind of why we brought this back, because, you know, as you mentioned, 1994 and Year of the Roller Coaster. We all know that was massive. I would say 2024 is the biggest year since then.
There's just so much going on this year that actually it's quite difficult to feel like there's almost too much to try and fit in, because everything I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I'm here for this roller coaster and this new ride. And there's just too much to try and cram in.
There is. I mean, we've got to start, of course, with Hyperion opening 4th of May, the new UK's tallest roller coaster. Have you got any initial thoughts, gut instincts on it?
I'm really looking forward to Hyperion. I think it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that back in 1994, the big one opened as was it the world's tallest roller coaster at the time?
Yeah.
Or was it Europe's tallest? The world's tallest. Now we're in 2024 and we've got Thorpe Park opening the UK's tallest roller coaster. So it kind of fits quite nicely. Yes, I'm really looking forward to that. That first drop just looks insane. So
it does.
Can't wait to go on that.
I hope it rides as well as it looks. It's always hard, isn't it, when you're just watching those trains go around and you're like, oh, how intense is it? You can't tell.
Definitely, and particularly with lap bars as well. Like
you've got that extra sort of exposure, and of course it's a John Burton piece of work, and we've seen his work so far, and all the things that he's been doing at Tower. So even beyond the roller coaster itself, I think there's going to be a lot around it.
But actually, there's I think Thorpe Park have done quite a nice job this year, working on their image, I guess. So not just with Hyperion, but like the way they've been TLC in the park and touching it up and kind of improving. They've got their brand new logo. So I think they're trying to definitely rebrand themselves this year as well. So I'm looking forward to visit and seeing all the kind of changes that they've done to the park and to kind of freshen it up as well.
Seems like it's a bit of a theme, isn't it? And every year we hope that Merlin are taking this kind of stuff seriously, because if you are a theme park fan, you go for the roller coasters most of the time, but there's nothing worse than going to a park and feeling like it's letting itself go. And I think there have been years, certainly in recent years, where we've all kind of thought parks are maybe letting themselves go a bit. They're not taking care of the finer details. They're concentrating maybe on the big stuff and missing the little stuff. So hopefully it is a bit of a pattern that we're seeing, that actually those smaller details are starting to be noticed and starting to be classed as a bit more important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll bring people back, because people who might visit just once in a year, if they have a great experience with, seeing the parks, definitely looking better in terms of theming and additions, that people will want to come back again. That thing of, oh, that looks amazing, I can't wait to go and visit it again and see that ride again. So yeah, it's looking really good at the minute.
Also, sort of reverting back to 1994, of course, one of the parks involved in that year of the roller coaster was Drayton Manor, and they opened Shockwave. And fittingly, in 2024, they've kind of released their reborn version, reimagining version of Shockwave. It's like everyone thought, 30 years, it's about time we sort of strip these things out and change them around a bit. I've not been and ridden the Wave, as it's now called. I'll tell you my first thought on it. I have never seen an uglier train. Ever.
Is it the bar that just goes across the front?
Oh, isn't it? It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. I guess they're working with what they can work with, but I just can't. Even if they could have put some, I don't know, just a nice pointy front on it or something, it just looks a bit weird.
And as a male, and anyone else who's male who's ridden Shockwave will know that actually probably with it being sit down is probably going to be a lot more comfortable than it was as a stand-up coaster, particularly during the brake run. So I think we can all agree that although the train looks ugly, I'm pretty confident that it'll be a more comfortable and enjoyable ride for us male guests.
A record attempt on Shockwave. I don't know, was it a record? We were riding it basically 26 times in a row. Wow. I think it was 26 because it was the 26th anniversary. It was something a lot. It was almost that many. And I was fine with it, but I was riding it with a couple of male colleagues who, they were walking
times.
off. Wow. No getting off. They walked off with the bowed legs. Yeah. I think it's the right thing for the park to have done. I think it's nice that you've got a looping coaster. For a lower height limit, it's not something that we see a lot anymore. It might be a good first looping coaster for some younger kids, and I think the thing that Drayton Manor are doing, they're really nailing down their niche and what they are now.
Yeah,
they're
which
not
is
a
good.
bit of everything. They
And I think it's good
we
that
are a
they've
family
kept the
park.
coaster. I think it's good they've kept that coaster as well, because like it was sad losing Apocalypse. I know you're not a fan of drop towers, uh,
Let's not
but
start on the drop towers.
uh, but losing Apocalypse was quite. I was a bit disappointed, but again, I can kind of see why that. With them removing G-force as well, and anything that was kind of pushing that kind of more. They want to be a family park, don't they?
Yeah.
So I can see why they're trying
It
to do
all
that.
makes sense. Of course, they've got a new Intamin family coaster coming soon as well. So
Yes.
again, it's just nice seeing the investment. Like, these parks are getting new coasters. They're not going stale. They are investing. It's really good for us as enthusiasts. It's good for the UK theme park industry, I think, to just see all these new rides, new investment happening.
Absolutely.
I think it's a really exciting time.
Definitely.
And another new ride for this year, Lego's Minifigure Speedway at
Yes.
Legoland Windsor. Dueling coaster for a younger audience. I think it's brilliant. Really well themed.
Does look a lot of fun.
It does. And again, it's just fitting that brand perfectly. It's just an exciting time. There's a lot of coasters opening. And I always think a year when you've got a lot of roller coasters is a really exciting year. It's great having flat rides. But a year with a lot of roller coasters, as roller coaster enthusiasts, it's always going to kind of light our fire.
And there's a lot of new things within it. So like in this year particularly, it's not just one thing. Some parks, like same with Drayton Manor, they're obviously, they've redone Shockwave into the Wave, but they're still opening an Intamin family coaster as well. And at Alton Towers, obviously we've had Nemesis Reborn. Hex is planning to be reopened this year with a lot of money going into fixing that. But also I was there the other day, and obviously the boards have gone up around by Bunker 94, where Project Ocean is meant to be opening this year as well. So
like literally it's just got its planning permission confirmed, which is great, because obviously if the planners put a stop to something, then nobody gets anything. Noticed in the planning application, it says it basically names a top spin in the planning application. So I know that for ages that's been basically everyone's saying, Ripsaw's coming back. Ripsaw's not coming back. I don't think Towers are gonna put in Ripsaw Reborn. No. I think it's hugely likely it's a top spin. But it'll be interesting to see what they do and how they now tie that in to that whole sort of new Forbidden Valley area and what they do with it. And I really, really hope they do something exciting with it. I'm sure they will. I'm sure John Burton will be all over it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think like with the original Ripsaw, how it fit in with the theme of Forbidden Valley at the time, I'm sure they'll do something incredibly similar with whatever topspin they put in there, today it'll fit in with the whole phalanx kind of facility re-theme of the area. So that's looking really exciting as well. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot.
Yeah, certainly a lot better than a fairground flat ride in that.
Oh yes, I'm glad we've seen the back of those ones, definitely, for sure.
Does anyone miss those? But just put it out there to the Parkcast audience. Anyone missing those flat rides? Didn't think so. And of course, the biggest news, the big news is the Universal project, which if this happens, and every day I'm more and more confident that this is going to happen, this is huge, isn't it?
Oh, it's massive for the theme park industry here in the UK, and for fanatics, fans. I was talking to someone about it the other day, and I was talking about it, and I was like, I feel like this is some kind of dream, like I'm talking, but the fact it's actually happening. I was like, I'm talking about Universal Studios in the UK, and it almost sounds like, is this what we're actually talking about, this idea? You
won't have to go on a 9-hour flight to go to Universal.
Exactly. So it's really interesting. I mean, obviously we know that it'll be a long time before it opens, but that gives us plenty of time to kind of think about, what might be there. 'Cause I'm intrigued with the whole Wizarding World of Harry Potter as well, because it will be close to the Warner Brothers studio tour as well.
Yeah.
Because my wife said, they'll definitely do it because it's in the UK. But then you're like, well, it'll be interesting how that's all going to work out with the Warner Brothers studio tour close by, and what they are going to put. I really hope for Velocicoaster.
Can you imagine?
Just having that, just a couple of hours down the road, and it's like perfect.
yeah, it will be awesome. I know obviously there was a big consultation that was happening a few weeks ago. You had Paige Thompson, who's the president of New Ventures for Universal Destinations and Experiences, and John McReynolds. Now he's the senior vice president of external affairs for Universal Destinations and Experiences. Now, I don't know who those guys are, but their titles make them sound pretty impressive.
They do.
And I'm guessing Universal are not going to wheel out those guys unless they're very serious about it. And I know from the people who went to the consultation, obviously these guys couldn't say a lot, but what they could say is that they are hugely optimistic about what's going on. And that fills me with confidence.
Yeah, there seems a lot of positivity coming back from it. So you would think, wouldn't you, that they're, got a schedule of when it's going to be completed by. They've obviously got all this all planned in. So it's really exciting. Really is exciting.
We can only wait with bated breath. Of course, we will follow this on Partcast as it develops over the next year or so. We'll try to get someone from Universal to come on and have a chat with us as well. That would be epic. And we can just see where this goes. But if this happens, make no doubt about it, this is the biggest investment in the UK theme park industry.
Absolutely.
Probably forever. A park from scratch just doesn't happen anymore.
No.
So to get something like that, I think, imagine this is going to be like Planet Coaster in real life.
I'm already
literally see it from the ground up.
I'm already saving up for an annual pass now, Bex. I'm already saving up for an
You'll
annual
need
pass
to.
now. I'm going to be saving up. I'm already saving up now. I mean, the thing that interests me is how the Merlin Park's going to react, because they've had dominance in the UK for so many years. Obviously, you've got Blackpool Pleasure Beach as well that still does really well. I'm intrigued at how they're going to react, because I've always felt that they've needed that little bit of competition.
Yeah.
And as we've kind of already mentioned, really that they've already started to step up their game in terms of improving the theming of their rides. We looked at with the Curse at Alton Manor, when Wicker Man was installed, and all the work that's gone into Nemesis Reborn, like Hyperia. There's obviously a lot going on, but I'm intrigued to see what they're going to do to make sure they're able to compete with Universal and keep people coming back to their parks, because it's going to be difficult.
Well, the reality is, if you're not an enthusiast, you probably go to one park a year and you choose where your theme park visit's going to be, because, a family day out at a theme park, if you're not a season pass holder, you're talking probably 200 quid at least, all in. It's not a cheap day out. And so, if you've got a choice and you're going on your theme park visit of the year, where are you going to go? And again, it's great news for the industry. Competition is good. It breeds creativity. It breeds investment. So as park fans, we're set to benefit from that in more ways than just experiencing new rides. It's going to be great if it happens. We are at the stage where it's got to be presented to the government for approval. They reckon if it gets done, it'll be about 2030. So that sounds like ages, doesn't it? It's like 6 years.
Yes.
But COVID, when I stopped doing this podcast, it was 4 years ago. That's gone so quickly.
It has, yeah.
6 years will fly by.
Yeah.
Especially as you start seeing spades in the ground, structures going up.
Well, it's the same with Epic Universe over in Florida. They've obviously started construction 2018, I think it was, on that. And that's obviously coming together, nearly being completed now. So that's kind of a similar time frame, isn't it? That seems about right. But I'm not going to even think about how old I'll be by that point. I'm ignoring that bit.
Right. That's the big news for this year. Obviously, as the podcast goes on, we'll chat about more things as they're happening and as stuff comes in, and we will discuss all that kind of stuff. But also on this podcast, what we're really going to focus on is bringing you really cool chats with people in the theme park industry who are super influential. That's what we want this podcast to all be about. First episode back in 4 years. I wanted to come back with a bang, and I sort of drew up a wish list, didn't I, of who would I like to chat to for this first episode. And the person at the top of this wish list, somehow we've managed to convince to come on this podcast with us.
Yes, we did.
It's Mr. John Wardley.
Podcast. the UK's original theme park podcast.
Okay, so on podcast, we're really pleased to welcome the one and only Mr. John Wardley. John, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Nice talking to you.
It's really good of you to give up your time for us, because we know how busy you are, even now in your, I'll put retirement in inverted commas. You always seem to be popping up here, there and everywhere. How much actual retirement time are you getting? How much have you taken up gardening or something like that?
Yeah, well, I've finished the book now, and that's obviously published. And I'm at the moment I'm recording the audiobook version, because a lot of people seem to want the audiobook. But yes, it's gardening and going on holiday and enjoying things like that. Yeah.
It's so blissful. I can only imagine a time in my life where those things might be able to happen. Having a 3-year-old, it's
well, it'll take a few years yet before you get to retirement age. Believe me.
It doesn't sound like you've retired anyway. I'm going to keep using those inverted commas because you haven't stopped. We'll come on to what you've been doing more recently as we chat, but for anyone who's maybe a fair weather enthusiast, let's say, of the theme park industry, who doesn't know so much about you, let's go right back to the very start, and how you got involved in this crazy world of theme parks and roller coaster design, because I'm guessing that when you were very young, it wasn't the career path you necessarily saw yourself going down.
Well, it was something that always fascinated me when I was very young. Amusement rides. There weren't theme parks, of course, way back in the 50s and 60s. There were fun fairs and amusement parks, but there weren't theme parks. I was working in the film industry and film special effects, and I always, whenever a visitor came on a film set and saw what we were doing live, it used to blow their minds. You know, the special effects and the scale of the sets and everything we were doing used to blow their minds. And I used to think it's such a great shame that we have to film all this and dub and edit it, and eventually it gets projected on a screen in a cinema. If only there was a way of bringing the live audience to see what we're doing. And I thought, well, I've heard about Disneyland, not been there, but I think it's probably just that. It's film sets, talent within the film industry, but bringing a live audience to experience it all. So I thought, right, well, I better jump on a plane and find out what it's all about. So I literally did that. I went to Disneyland and realized that was what the basis of the theme park was. And we needed to do it in Britain. Nobody had done it. And I was determined that I was going to be there on the ground floor when the time was right.
How did you make that first inroad then? So you went over to Disney and you thought, this is great. I've also probably spent a load of money on food and merchandise, and there's so much atmosphere going on here. This is a great place to be. What was your next step? How did you think, okay, how are we going to get this started?
Well, I was involved with Madame Tussauds, the wax museum, who wanted to make their figures move. And they contacted me because I had done some animations. And I got involved with Madame Tussauds. I'd also done a small amount of work for amusement parks around Britain, dark rides and things like that. Now, Madame Tussauds owned Chessington Zoo, and it wasn't doing very well. So they said to me, would I go to Chessington Zoo and see if I could sort out the fun fair and the circus? So I went to Chessington Zoo and I thought, well, there's great potential here. It's right next to where the new M25 is going to be built. And it's not a case of sorting out the fun fair and the circus. It needed something a bit more radical. And I thought this actually could be turned into a theme park. So I simply replied and said, I don't think the answer to your problem is just replacing a few tatty fairground rides with some smarter fairground rides and a rather traditional circus with something a bit more upmarket. And they got back to me and said, well, in that case, what do you propose? Well, I was quite audacious. I thought, right, well, for a penny in for a pound. And I put forward what was a fairly grandiose scheme, thinking, well, they're never going to accept it. And they said, all right, do it. I couldn't believe it.
So was part of you thinking, oh God, have I bit enough more than I can chew now?
Well, I suppose when you're young and you're really motoring when it comes to ideas and creativity, you don't even think about that. Yeah, I
Mm,
just thought, wow, great, okay, they've given me the opportunity. Let's put forward a scheme. So I put forward the scheme. They built a team of people around me who filled in all the gaps as far as architecture, landscaping, management, engineering, civil engineering, and so on. So we had a really crack team. We did it. It was great, and of course we were writing the rule book. No one had done it before, so we did. I think it was 1987. We opened Chessington World of Adventures, and overnight it was a colossal success.
mm,
And Pearson's, who owned Madame Tussauds, said, right, well, there's money to be made in this theme park business. Let's expand. We couldn't expand at Chessington. The local authority didn't want any expansion then. So we had to look around. And to cut a long story short, we bought Alton Towers.
mm.
And that was when it really started to take off.
John, do you still get to visit Chessington much now?
I
Do you
haven't
do you
been
ever
to
get?
Chessington. I haven't been to Chessington for about 20 years, I don't think.
Wow,
Mm.
wow.
Yeah.
So have you
Um,
not ridden Vampire with the new trains compared to the original ones that you put on it?
No, no, no. Now I'm basking in my retirement. It's difficult to shift me much further south than Alton Towers. I basically love Alton Towers, although of course Chessington was how it all began. But I've more or less lost contact with everybody at Chessington. I'd like to go there one day and see what they've done. But Alton Towers, that was really where we started to feel our feet and where Pearson and latterly the other owners of Madame Tussauds began to realise that this was a real money maker.
mm,
So after Alton, we got involved in Portaventura in Spain, which was great. I worked out there for a while, and we developed Portaventura. Then we bought Hyde Park in Germany, Gardaland in Italy. We sold our share in Portaventura so we could buy Thorpe Park. And I was involved in all those schemes in the very early days. Um, but most of my sort of real creativity was aimed at Alton Towers.
mm.
After Nemesis, we did Oblivion, then Air, and then it got to retirement age, and I decided to retire. But they didn't seem to want me to retire, and there's such a lovely bunch of people, and Merlin Entertainment's a great people to work for.
Mm,
So I have a good relationship with them all, and from time to time they ask me to go in and have a chat with them and go through various ideas. The new creative lead at Alton Towers, John Burton, and I get on very well together, and he throws ideas at me and I throw them back at him, and so on. So it's a very nice relationship.
Just obviously,
So, John, sorry, Becca.
sorry.
I was just going to say, John. Sorry, you go, Becca.
No, you carry on.
No, I was going to say, John, because you obviously, with the work you did at Chessington, so with doing the Bubble Works, Vampire as well, had all that then help you when you then moved to Alton and began working on the Haunted House, the Runaway Mine Train, and Nemesis? Had they helped you get an idea for how this all works? So then,
Oh
when you
yes, I
went to
mean,
Alton,
I have a great deal of affection for the dear old Bubble Works. That I think I learned more from the Bubble Works than any other project I've been involved in. And I was very sorry when I heard that they changed it. But you know, times move on and so on. So the Bubble Works certainly helped me do the Haunted House at Alton Towers, and the Vampire, in many respects, helped me do Nemesis because. We were looking around for a new kind of ride, a big, spectacular new ride for Alton Towers. And obviously, we couldn't put in a great high coaster. Alton Towers is very restrictive in terms of what we can do there. Nothing must be seen from outside the site. So I wanted to put a coaster in, but it couldn't be a great high structure. And of course, we'd done the Vampire at Chessington, which was a suspended coaster with the vehicles below the track. But up to that point, nobody had actually turned a suspended coaster upside down and made it go through inversions. And then I heard that Bolliger and Mabillard were working on a prototype to do just that. And I thought, well, this could be the answer. This could be just the kind of ride we want. So I went and I rode their prototype ride along with Nick Varney, who was marketing manager at Alton Towers then. I mean, Nick was to become CEO of the second biggest attraction operator in the world, Merlin Entertainment, second only to Disney. But in those days, Nick was just marketing manager at Alton Towers. And Nick and I went and rode it, and we knew without a shadow of doubt that was the right thing. The only way, of course, that we could get the kind of height that we wanted was to half bury the thing, and that took an enormous part of the budget. And everybody who heard what we were doing and could see that we were blasting tons and tons of dynamite after the Staffordshire countryside. They said, you're crazy. You know, you're spending all this money digging a great big hole and burying a ride. But we knew that it was going to be something very special, and the result was Nemesis.
And I guess I think you've talked about this before, that if you actually hadn't had to dig that hole, it wouldn't have been the iconic ride probably that it is today.
No, that's absolutely right, Bex. I mean, many B&M inverters have been built since. I mean, something in the region of 40 odd Bolliger and Mabillard inverted coasters. But Walter Bolliger still reckons that Nemesis is the best. It's probably one of the smallest. It's one of the shortest. But because of the fact we had to think outside the box and we had to do different things with it, that's what made it very, very special. And of course, the new Reborn Nemesis has added that incredible amount of theatricality to the whole thing. So it has given it a brand new lease of life. But little did we think 30 odd years ago that Nemesis would still be an iconic ride that is talked about all around the world, and that it would be given another 30 years of life as well, which is quite incredible.
Yeah, it's
John,
crazy actually. I married my husband. My husband's a fighter pilot. He flies RAF Typhoons for a living. And when I met him, I sort of told him I'm a roller coaster enthusiast. And he looked at me and he kind of scorned, and he was like, do you realize how much G I pull every single day? And I was like, okay, when was the last time you went to Alton Towers or Blackpool or any other theme park? And he hadn't been on a roller coaster since he was a kid, basically. So I said, we're going to Alton Towers. And this was our second date. We went to Alton Towers for our second date. And I said, I'm taking you on Nemesis. And he looked at it and he was like, this isn't going to faze me. And he rode it, and we rode the back row on Nemesis, and he came off, and he said that was intense. And that's from someone who literally, you know, flies a fighter jet every day, 5 days of the week at least. And he came off Nemesis and said that was a really intense experience. I guess you had no idea when you were designing this back then that it was going to be quite as intense.
Well, yes, I knew it was going to be intense, because when you're working out the layout and profile of a coaster, you can calculate very quickly what the G forces are that you're pulling, and you know when the G forces are going to be uncomfortable. The trick is to make sure that the transitions are smooth and that people aren't jerked around and thrown about. But you can apply both positive and negative G's to people, and it's exhilarating without it being uncomfortable. But so, yes, I knew Nemesis was going to be a real thrill ride, even if you aren't sat in the front row seeing where you're going. It's still very intense.
How did you do that back then? Obviously now, you know, roller coaster designers have all the tools and, you know, computers and everything at their disposal to design these things. I'm guessing you had computers, but surely it wasn't quite as technologically advanced when it came to designing it as it is now.
Oh no, I mean, it's a piece of cake now. You can load up No Limits 2, and you can create a very, very realistic and practical coaster. I mean, it isn't just a toy. No Limits is a serious piece of software, and it's a piece of cake now, and it takes no time to do it. Though back then it was much, much more complicated, and you didn't even have CAD design that allowed you to actually do things on the screen. It was a case of tracing lines on a piece of paper. So it was very, very complicated, and I didn't used to crunch the numbers. Mr. Stengel in Germany used to do the number crunching, so I'd send him
Mm.
my ideas, or I'd send B&M my ideas, and Mr. Stengel would crunch the numbers and say, well, this is the kind of G-force profile that you're generating, and we would look at that. So it was a much more complicated business back then, and enormously time consuming as well.
When you went to Alton Towers, because of the sheer size of the park, and also because you couldn't build above tree height, did it feel very daunting at the time, or did you just have that sense of feeling of actually we'll be okay?
Well, it was a magnificently landscaped site, and there was the old corkscrew, which was a demountable ride. It wasn't even a permanent ride. Most of the rides there were large traveling fairground rides. The one ride that wasn't was the Rapids ride. And I used the Rapids ride as a starting point because I'm a great believer that for everybody that rides a ride at a theme park, probably 3 or 4 people get pleasure watching it. And the Rapids ride had been incredibly naively designed by the previous owners of the park, whereby you didn't even get so much as a glimpse of the ride unless you went it through the ride entrance. There was no opportunity to view it. So the first thing I did was reconfigure all the paths so that they were routed around the Rapids ride, and then took a Mac powered runaway train ride, which we put a small version into Chessington a few years previously. So again, I knew what the thing was capable of doing, and threaded the runaway train ride through the Rapids ride. And that worked very successfully, but it was only a temporary stopgap, and we needed to actually do something quite major to let people know that Alton Towers was changing. Well, not far away from the Rapids ride was an old works yard with some old sort of workshops and stuff like that on it, surrounded by quite tall trees on 3 sides. So we said to the local planners, look, if we put a fairly sizable building in the middle of these trees, they're not going to be seen. So would you let us do it? And they said, well, yes, in principle. So I thought, well, maybe it's a good opportunity to build a big dark ride. Well, we put the Fifth Dimension ride into Chessington, and although I wasn't actually involved in the design of the story and theming of the Fifth Dimension, that was done by Madame Tussauds Studios, I did organize the transit system and things through the building. And so I knew how big a building you needed in order to create a fairly sizable dark ride. Talked it through with everyone at Alton Towers, and we agreed that the one kind of theme that works well for a dark ride, if you're not using an intellectual property, was a spooky theme, a sort of haunted house. Disney's Haunted Mansion was very popular. Everybody was doing rip-offs of Disney's Haunted Mansion using endless transit systems. And I thought, well, I want to build a dark ride that where you feel as if you're really genuinely exploring a haunted house. But we needed high capacity, and that's where the endless transit system works. So I thought, well, yes, but what if we created a dark ride transit system that loaded in a continuous way, rather like the endless transit system does, but when you leave the station, the vehicles accelerate and peel off away from the vehicles behind, and you then explore the ride supposedly on your own. So that was the basic premise. As I say, we'd had a very, very happy relationship with Keith Sparks on the bubble work. We wanted the haunted house to be fun and wacky and not too scary. Keith's sense of humor was absolutely spot on and perfect. So the two of us got together and drew up a sort of storyboard for the haunted house, and it all came together. So the haunted house went in next, um, and that was the point at which we realised we had to do something major. The corkscrew up to that point had been supposedly the star turn at Alton Towers, and its appeal was wearing a bit thin. And so that's where the idea for Nemesis came about. So that is really how the seeds of success were sown there, and the rest just is history.
I was 10 in 1994, and I remember Nemesis launching it. And like you say, no one had done an inverted coaster that went upside inverted itself at the time. And I remember looking at it and thinking, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like this. And it was such a draw. And it was the first time I went to Alton Towers, actually. Me and my family went up because Nemesis had opened. So it certainly did its job in that respect. Do you find it interesting, though, looking at how Nemesis Reborn, everything that's gone into that and the remarketing of it and the story and everything that Alton Towers have done to relaunch Nemesis? I don't remember much of that back in 1994. I think the whole marketing element of it was probably a bit more straightforward. It was TV ads and that was kind of it.
Oh yes, I mean, as I say, we were writing the rule book, and no one had done anything like it before. Blackpool had put in the big one, which was a conventional coaster, and they were marketing it in a conventional way. And I think probably using the backstory of the Nemesis monster was a useful marketing tool, but it was just a backstory. It enabled a TV commercial to be put together and a bit of theming. But essentially, the ride was left to its own devices to create the thrills, and to sort of perpetuate the hype around the ride. What's happened with Nemesis Reborn is that we've taken the basic ride and not changed it really. I mean, it's got wonderful new track and it's a lovely new piece of kit, but the basic ride and the thrills of the ride are the same. But John Burton and the team at Merlin Magic Making have done the most amazing job with the theming and in conjunction with all the marketing people at Alton Towers, have come up with such a clever. It isn't even a backstory; it's a front story, if ever there was such a thing, it has added a brand new dimension to it, and very successful it is too. I mean, the interest that has been created is just unbelievable, and I'm confident that Nemesis has been given another 30 years life. It really has.
The whole area just looks incredible, John. Honestly, like, you must be really proud and pleased to just see something that you worked so hard on be given this new lease of life that's going to give it so many more years. And there's such a buzz around the area and at Alton Towers particularly at the minute because the work that's been going on as well, and it just looks amazing. And you mentioned the haunted house as well, so you've had one of your other previous rides so with the Curse of Alton Manor now, so you've had two of your rides now been reborn, as it were. How do you feel about the work that was done on the Curse at Alton Manor as well?
Well, I was thrilled. I mean, I was very disappointed when the old haunted house was turned into a shoot 'em up dark ride.
I think we all were, John.
Yeah, same, John.
Yeah.
John, I was sad. I remember 2003 was a sad year.
Yeah, I mean, but basically, the whole idea behind the original haunted house was that we designed 5 new effects that would be put in every year for 5 years to keep the ride fresh, to keep it alive, to keep the suspense and the surprise. Well, the haunted house was a success, and in year 2 we were very busy building Nemesis, and everyone said, well, the haunted house is fine, so don't let's mess about with the thing. Well, year 3 Nemesis opened, And again, we were pretty preoccupied with that. And again, the park was doing very well. So they said, well, we'll leave the haunted house to its own devices. And basically, it was not changed year after year after year. It was the same old haunted house. And it wasn't given the TLC that it deserved. It wasn't kept fresh. It wasn't just sort of really kept up to standard. So when Alton had a fallow year, and I can't remember which year it was, but it had a year when it was not going to have a big new ride. And someone from Merlin Magic Making obviously went to the IARPA convention and saw that people were retrofitting old dark rides with laser guns and turning them into shoot 'em up games. Well, I'd ridden a few of these in the States, and very nice they were, but you were so busy firing your gun at little red dots of light that the whole ethos and the fun and the story and the drama of the dark ride was completely ignored. You weren't at all involved in the actual ride itself. You were playing a game. So I was really disappointed that that it was done in that way. I felt that it would have been far better to have done a serious revamp on the haunted house. Well, Duel never really sort of took off in terms of popularity. It became an also-ran ride. So when a couple of years ago, it was decided that Nemesis was going to have to be closed for a year. What on earth do we do to create a new attraction for that closed year? And someone said, well, let's revamp the haunted house. Let's rip out Duel and go back to basic principles. Well, I thought this is all very well, but who's going to do it? Because I'm retired. And then along came John Burton. And immediately John said, when I was a little kid, I rode your haunted house. It scared the living daylights out of me. It would be lovely to go back to that kind of feel. And I thought, this is the guy. This is the man.
Yeah.
we need.
Yeah.
And John and I, he threw ideas around, and although I wasn't actually creatively involved, I did sort of discuss ideas with John, and what Merlin Magic Making came up with for that was sensational. I was absolutely thrilled. So on opening day, well, I rode it a few days before opening day, actually, but when I rode it, it gave me really a tingle up the back of my spine, because I thought this is what the haunted house should have been. And just as Nemesis was given a revamp the following year, taking it back to its original roots and ethos, but so much better. The same thing happened to the haunted house. So what you've got now at Alton Towers are two fabulous rides that will stand the test of time.
It's just, honestly, John, it's so great. I was a huge fan of the haunted house as a child. I loved that attraction, and then to see, I was actually quite moved, because I wanted to go in without any idea what was going to happen. And that's the problem, I guess, with having a lot of social media now, is it's very easy to find out and see things. But I was really like moved and like, wow, I'm so pleased that they've done that to that ride, because it's kind of respected the haunted house, but it's also kind of brought it up to date. And the other thing as well, John, is, talking about Keith Sparks as well. And I love the tribute to him in that ride, and talking with Sparks Estates. What do you think Keith would have thought of Curse at Alton Manor?
Keith would have loved it. Perhaps it hasn't got the naughty humour that Keith liked to inject. Keith always liked sort of jokes about farts and things like that in his rides. There was schoolboy humour injected, which of course was what we did in the Bubble Works. But the fact is that times have changed. The audience is far more sophisticated than it was, and it's emotionally much more robust, thanks to the kind of imagery that people are used to on video gaming nowadays, they're far more emotionally robust. I mean, if you take that last effect in the new ride, in the curse, if we'd put that effect in 30 years ago, we would have had parents seriously complaining that their children were having nightmares. I mean, it is quite an intense effect. Whereas nowadays, it's quite acceptable, and I don't suppose it gives anybody a nightmare.
I don't know. I've heard some stories from people who've said even that ending is quite intense and has left them like, not able to sleep for a couple of nights. So,
well, the fact is that you always have to be in tune with your audience, and this is where I know damn well that I couldn't do what I used to do in today's age, and that's where I have respect for all the creatives within the group, and I bow to them. And there are some decisions that they make that my gut reaction is, oh no, that's wrong, and I'm proved to be completely wrong. I'm proved that. So that's why I'm always very, very reticent to come down fairly vociferously on anything. I will mull it over and think twice about whether I sort of say, "Oh no, we didn't used to do that in the good old days." That is, they don't need that kind of input. They don't need some idiot like me to come along and say, "Oh, in the good old days, this is the way we used to do it, so you should do it now." Times have changed, and the creatives now are totally in tune with what the modern audience want, but just occasionally a little bit of good old-fashioned wisdom from me kind of comes in handy, I guess.
Well, clearly does. They keep asking you to come back, and you're still, like you say, very much part of the family there. So I'm sure that you've still got a lot of wisdom that they benefit from and that they appreciate. Just talking about sort of the reimagining of rides, I don't know if you can give us a sort of a personal indication on what you think the future is for. I'm going to say Galactica. I still call it Air. I'm sure you still call it Air. And how that now sits in the sort of Forbidden Valley area with, the Nemesis Reborn theme kind of seeping out even further just into the whole area. It's always been a bit of a weird one, hasn't it, Air? And I don't know if you can give us any sort of insight onto how that was originally sort of conceived to sit in Forbidden Valley.
Yes, well, the original premise was that Nemesis was the villain, Air was the hero. So they weren't conceived to work hand in hand, but what Air did was enable you to do something that you've always wanted to do, and that is fly. Whereas with Nemesis, there was a degree of adversary, and Nemesis was the villain, and you were fighting it and overcoming it. Whereas Air allowed you to do what you always wanted to do, which was fly, and that worked extremely well. For various reasons, a lot of the landscaping and theming that was originally designed for Air never materialized. For budgeting and time reasons. I mean, Air was a horrendously complicated ride for B&M to produce. It was the first flying coaster. It involved a lot of brand new technology. So there were a lot of teething problems for the first few months. There were delays, and quite a bit of the theming and landscaping that was originally designed wasn't put in. Now, as so often with these things, if they don't get put in to start off with, it all gets overlooked, and everybody says, well, the ride's doing very well and everybody's happy with it, so let's spend the money on the next project. So that's what tends to happen. Now, I know that discussions are taking place regarding the whole area and how Air fits in, or how Galactica fits in. Yes, I have been consulted on this, and discussions are taking place. Nothing has been finalized. All I can say is that the ideas are gelling extremely well, that there will be some changes that will be seen to the area next year, and I'm thrilled with the way it's all going. That's really all I can say at the moment.
Oh, you've given us a little tease, just a little
Nice.
tease.
So obviously, there are a few things that you've been heavily involved with. Knowing what you know now, is there any particular attraction or ride or something that you would do differently?
Yes, but it isn't an attraction or ride within the park. It's regarding the hotel. When we first designed the Alton Towers Hotel, we were very naive and we assumed that after people had had a fun, tiring day on the park, they would go back to the hotel, they would want a few beers and a meal, and would then sink into bed and fall fast asleep. Nothing could have been further from the truth, because people came back from the park, had a meal, and then said, "Now entertain us for the evening." And we had not actually built any permanent entertainment facility into the first hotel. So we had to very hastily reconfigure that galleon in the center of the main atrium to at least allow some kind of show to be put on. When we built the conference center, I was very keen that it should also serve as some kind of permanent entertainment venue, a dinner show or whatever. And that hasn't happened, and that is something which I'm talking to Bianca and John and all the people in Merlin about, because there is no doubt that people in the evenings at Alton Towers, and of course now there are 3 hotels and a vast amount of accommodation, and apart from buying food and drink, there's not an awful lot of ways in which they can spend their money. And so I would love to see some kind of show, whether it be a dinner show or whatever, that can be done and not rigged up in a temporary way, but something that Alton Towers can function as an entertainment venue in the evening. So that is something that I wished we had put into the first hotel. It didn't happen in the second and third hotels, and I think the time is right for something like that to happen.
Just, John, taking you back to 1994 briefly, because we are 30 years on from that, which is, I'm sure, crazy to you. It's crazy to me. 30 years after that original year of the roller coaster. So for the non-die-hard enthusiasts amongst us, 1994, Nemesis opened, Blackpool Pleasure Beach opened, the big one, and Drayton Manor opened Shockwave.
Yes.
Do you remember at the time, was there a bit of a feeling of an arms race amongst the 3 parks, or were you just very much in your lane and you weren't really interested in what other parks were doing? Or was there a, hang on a minute, there's 2 other parks opening big attractions in this year as well, we've got to make sure ours is the best?
Well, the arms race was being handled very well by Nick Varney and the marketing team. I was very confident that what we were building at Alton Towers was very different to what Blackpool and Drayton Manor were putting in. Now, during the build up to Nemesis, and I was very friendly with Jeffrey Thompson. We were great pals, and Jeffrey was shouting from the rooftops what they were building, which was probably the right thing to do. And let's face it, you couldn't mistake it as the things started to rise up on the promenade at Blackpool. It was pretty obvious what the damn thing was. But we kept it very, very quiet as to what we were doing. We decided that, you see, the problem is if you start hyping an attraction up too far in advance, it loses a bit of impetus. So when you get near to the opening, the media are saying, well, okay, we've heard it all before. And what Merlin have always done, and Alton Towers in particular do, is keep the hype down until the very last minute, and then you hit them with what it is you're proposing. So when it came to Nemesis, we were very, very secretive, and of course we were even more secretive with air. The word got out that we must be building a flying coaster, but nobody could figure out how we were doing it. And even B&M in Switzerland were extraordinarily secretive about the way the cars worked. They even set up behind closed doors a separate design facility from their own design and manufacturing facility in Switzerland, so that most of their own staff didn't know how we were going to do it. You see, Vekoma, the way they do it is they sit you down in a seat backwards, and then turn you upside down at the top of the lift. We decided that no, if you were going to fly like Superman, you had to actually leave the station flying. And people couldn't figure out how we were going to do it. So we kept it very, very under wraps. So with Nemesis and the arms race, we just didn't tell people what we were doing. But the word soon got out that we were digging the most enormous hole in Staffordshire. Well, what sort of roller coaster, what sort of thing do you put down in that hole? And so there was a lot of speculation, but we weren't saying anything. And then eventually, when it was decided to actually launch the marketing campaign, which was just a few months before opening, it was very, very well conceived, very well put together, and it worked extremely well. Whereas Blackpool, bless them, all they could really say is that this is, well, they were saying it was the highest roller coaster in the world. And Drake Manor was sort of saying, we'll come and stand up on our wonderful stand-up roller coaster. Nemesis came in sort of under the radar with something completely audacious and very, very different. But I think all three rides worked extremely well that year. I mean, it generated a huge amount of interest, theme parks in general, and I'm certainly not going to denigrate any of the other rides.
No, and I think, year of the roller coaster, I think you can probably pinpoint that's the year that I decided roller coasters were my thing, because there was so much buzz about it, and parks were suddenly seen to be, a place to go because it was new, it was exciting. We hadn't seen anything like this before, and I think, yeah, as you say, for the theme park industry as a whole, that year was just so important in getting us to where we are now. Just quickly, talking on the marketing aspect, how do you feel now about the marketing campaign for 13?
For 13, the difficult thing with 13 was that we didn't want to give away what the USP of that ride was. In other words, the drop. The ride. It was the first time in the world that anyone had done anything quite as audacious with a roller coaster train as to make the track apparently collapse. So it wasn't easy marketing it, and the marketing campaign was that this is the most terrifying ride in the world, which it patently wasn't. But I was thrilled with the ride. I thought the ride worked extremely well. It had enormous capacity. I bullied Intamin like crazy to tighten up the sequencing of the drop mechanism so that we could get huge capacity out of the ride. And actually on opening day, we exceeded the theoretical capacity of the ride, which is quite something, because normally that takes you several months to gradually work up to full capacity. So from my point of view, I thought 13 worked extremely well. As far as how it was marketed, well, I wasn't involved in the marketing, so I can't really comment on it. I know it was marketed as a terrifying ride, and of course, as a roller coaster, the roller coaster bit is relatively soft, made even more soft by the fact that they made us put some trim brakes on the first drop.
Were you not impressed by that decision?
No, I was very disappointed that they made us do that.
What was the reason for that?
I think it was G-forces more than anything. I think the profile at the bottom of that drop was perfectly well conceived as far as not jerking your head around. But we had to do it. I like 13. I think it's a super ride. I think it stood the test of time as well, because it still takes people by surprise. It's rather like Hex. If you've not been in there before, if you've not done that attraction before, you think, what on earth is going on here? It's very disorientating. And the same, of course, is true of 13.
13 is my daughter's favorite ride. So, John, you know, it's a great coaster for families. So my eldest daughter is her favorite ride at Alton Towers. So, she absolutely loves it. But I think it was the idea that the marketing was trying to push this element that you had to be over a certain age, you had to have like a waiver from a doctor to say you were capable to ride it, you were healthy enough to experience what was about to happen. So I think it took a few people by surprise on opening day. They pushed all this side about being the most terrifying thing, and then you realize, oh, it's an intimate family coaster. But I certainly get an absolute buzz of going on 13 with people who don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's half the fun.
Watching a scary film, isn't it? You watch a film where you know the jump is coming, and you're kind of looking at them going, well, I know it's about to happen, and I want to see their reaction. And it's amazing how many times I've been on 13 and you hear people behind you or in front of you going, is that the end? Oh, are we going back in the station? And you don't realize it, and you think, I know what's about to happen. And then you get this great reaction when it actually plummets all the way down. It goes backwards, and it's a really good ride.
Definitely. 13 is no longer hyped up in the way that it was in order to launch it, and I think one has to just put that behind one and say the 13 is a very, very successful and a real fun ride. And the things that you're saying, Kev, is absolutely right. Half the fun when you've been on it before is to go on it with someone that hasn't been on it and be able to sort of think, well, I know what's coming now. And the same is true of Hex. I just love taking people on Hex who don't know what's going to happen to them and watch their reactions.
And that's obviously supposedly, touch wood, opening again for this season.
Yes.
And have you seen any of the changes within it? Do you know what they've done?
I haven't, but I'm at the park in a couple of weeks' time, and I hope that I'll get a chance to see it. But I know that the people that have seen the new lighting and new effects in there say that it is amazing, and it has given it a new lease of life once again. So what Bianca is doing now is shall we say refreshing Alton Towers. There is I mean, the wonderful thing about Bianca is she has come up from being a ride operator, a teenage ride operator. She knows her ride. She understands the grassroots of what tickles people's funny bones in theme parks. And I'm not saying that's been sadly missing, but my goodness, has she brought a breath of fresh air to Alton Towers.
Oh, absolutely.
And you can see it. Everyone can see it this year. The staff realize it. And the plans that are in the pipeline are so exciting. And so I think people will realize that there is a new era, shall we say, to Alton Towers.
It certainly felt like that, John, since Wicker Man opened in 2018. And this idea of, well, we're just going to build a ride and then move on. It's this feeling of let's really focus on immersing the guests in the storyline. It's not just a roller coaster, like you say, with your background in entertainment and being an entertainer. It's the idea you're taking people on this adventure through a story, like Hex does, Haunted House, Curse of Alton Manor does, Nemesis, Reborn, Wicker Man. They all do that, and the way it's going at the minute is really exciting as a fan of the park to see where it's going. And it's just really exciting to look to the future and thinking, well, if this is what they're doing now, I can't wait to see where we're going to be in 10 years' time.
Well, there's serious money being invested. You know, all the new stuff that's going in has cost mega bucks. Obviously, Merlin are going to want to see a return on that. But whereas perhaps in the past, the idea was that you put some new attractions in and it gave a return. The main thing is give us a return, and if you entertain people as a result, that's fine. that's been turned upside down. And the ethos is now, if we entertain people, we will make money. And that's the key to moving forward. You know, you start off by creating an entertaining product, and as a result, you make money out of it rather than the other way around.
What would you like to see happen at Alton Towers? Is it a new area or a new ride? What would you like to see go in there?
Well, I must admit, at the end of my new book, I do document an attraction that I designed for Chessington way back, the disaster zone, and I think that would be fun. There are two new attractions that are in the pipeline that I'm talking to John Burton about that are again really exciting, really fun, very different. That as I say, my ability to be in tune with the guests and what they want is not what it used to be. And I am very happy that a new team of young people are doing it. And I'm honored that from time to time they throw these ideas past me and allow me to make hopefully wise comments. But as far as creativity is concerned, I've got to leave that to others now.
I don't want to keep you too long because you have given us so much time. But John, you just mentioned your book. What made you want to write the second book? Obviously, your initial autobiography has been out for a few years. Was it that you just had more story to tell?
Well, it was that people were saying to me that after the first book ended, a lot has happened. And also I realized that there were a lot of things that had happened that were relevant, not just after the book ended, but throughout my career that would be good to commit to paper. So that's why I decided to write it. Again, not with the idea of publication, but just the satisfaction of being able to put on record and be able to work through these things and put them down on paper. It's amazing how you suddenly realize, oh, I'd forgotten that, and it makes you remember things. So people had said, oh, you should carry on writing. And the result is Life After Nemesis, which seems to have been quite well received, so I can't complain.
John, in your new book, you talk about being an entertainer, and that's kind of like your job title, really, isn't it? What is it that you enjoy most from seeing people on an attraction? Do you enjoy seeing people screaming or laughing? What is it about being an entertainer do you like seeing the most from people's reactions on your rides?
Well, it's allowing people to step out of perhaps a rather mundane everyday life and experience some thrills and some fun and some laughter and excitement. We've got a whole palette of emotions that we can play with. And I only want to play with the positive emotions. I don't particularly like terrifying people. People assume that when you're designing roller coasters that you're some kind of sadist that gets his kicks out of terrifying the living daylights of people. Nothing could be further from the truth. And the real thrill I get out of Nemesis is that sense when people come off the ride having previously approached it with enormous fear and trembling, and they come off with an enormous sense of satisfaction, thinking, you know, I'm so pleased I did it, I conquered it. The number of people that have said to me that Nemesis has really given them a huge amount of confidence to do things that they didn't dare do. So Nemesis has given me an enormous thrill in terms of the satisfaction and sense of achievement that people have had conquering their fears. People that wouldn't dare ride a roller coaster, and perhaps they've been bullied or cajoled into doing it. And very seldom does anyone ever come off Nemesis and say, I wish I hadn't done that. Nearly everybody comes off saying, well, I might not want to do it again, but I'm really glad I did it. So it's that kind of emotional thing that I find so satisfying, that people find the rides are thrilling, they're fun, it makes them laugh, it gives them a sense of achievement and so on. That's where I get my satisfaction.
I think that's a great answer. I've got a couple of just quick fire questions for you before you go. Where do you sit on the steel versus woody side of the enthusiast debate?
Well, I think if you read my book, I think I express fairly well the difference between a wooden coaster and a steel coaster. There is no, it's one isn't right and the other wrong, or vice versa. They're very different types of rides, but what I describe in the section in the book about wooden coasters versus steel coasters, I think basically sums it up. I love woodies, but by the same token, you can do such amazing things with steel coasters as well. So I'm not sitting on the fence. I'm just saying that it isn't one versus the other.
I think that's valid. I think there's probably very few of us who are very much one way or the other, although those who are quite vocal about it. Secondly, where have you still got the flying jacket? It was like iconic to see John Wardley in his flying jacket running around Nemesis.
It was auctioned off by one of the coaster associations for charity years ago.
Wow.
Donkeys years ago. So in fact, although it was a bit of a legend, it didn't last that long. It was hyped up for a long time, and I donated it, and it was auctioned off. So someone somewhere is wearing the thing here.
It will have come in handy this winter.
Yeah.
So cold.
Well, it was bitterly cold when you're working on a rolling. Actually, the coldest coaster site I've ever worked on was when we were building Dragon Khan in Spain. Now you think of Spain as being a hot country, but that winter before Dragon Khan opened was bitterly cold, and that jacket came in very useful then.
They are unbelievably. This is not an ad, by the way, for flying sheepskin jackets, but just to put it out there, they are incredibly warm.
I've got a quick one, Becca. I've got a quick one as well. Besides Nemesis, is there a particular attraction that you're most proud of?
Well, this will surprise you. I think it was the Bubble Works. The Bubble Works.
That's great.
Just worked so well. Again, it had that sort of ride had never been done before. And it all came together. The music, the transit system, the scenery, everything all came together. Again, the problem with dark rides is you have to keep them fresh. You can't just let the ride run and run and run when it's a show ride. So that was the problem with the Bubble Works. But I loved that ride. I really did, and I was so sorry when it went.
Final question from me. I'm not sure if you remember, but about maybe 20 years ago, we met in a restaurant in Cardiff Bay.
I remember it very, very well. I can remember the restaurant. I can remember the day very, very clearly.
Kev doesn't know this story. Kev's not heard this story.
No.
So when I was 18, I was working in a restaurant called Mama Amalfi in Cardiff Bay in what's now called the Red Dragon Centre. And it was a Saturday night, and a young gentleman came in asking if he could book a table for his family. And I immediately turned around and said, "You're John Wardley." To which I think, John, I'm not sure if anyone had ever recognized you in a restaurant before, but you look quite taken aback. Probably
I was
not
very taken aback. I was flattered, but I was taken aback.
What was more interesting is that you obviously came in and you sat down and had your meal with your family, and your family were amazed. They were gobsmacked. They were like, "She knows who he is." It was almost like in your little world, you do your job and you get on with it. And your family are like, "Oh, I don't know what he does, something with roller coasters." And when they were kind of put in this situation where somebody knew you for your work, that was unusual for them.
I was very honoured and flattered. I mean, obviously, in subsequent years, I am more recognised, and if I walk around the park, people come up and say hello, and it's lovely meeting people. It really is. Sort of special occasions like the opening of Nemesis Reborn. John Burton and I were mobbed, and it was wonderful. It was a very happy mob, but we were totally mobbed. But it's so nice because interaction with the people that are your customers, if you like, or the parks customers, is so important. And people on the whole are so nice and so generous and appreciative, and they say nice things about about what you've done and so on. So I get a great deal of buzz out of that. But I do remember that occasion extremely well. Yes.
Oh, that's made my day. You actually at the time you signed me a little card from the restaurant, and I kept that. And I had it up until about 3 years ago when I got a dog, and the dog got hold of it and she chewed it up. But I did keep that card for a long time. It came with me through a lot of house moves and all around the country where I've lived. I always sort of treasured that little card and that random little meeting that I had with a roller coaster designer in the Italian restaurant. John, thanks so much for talking to us. Obviously, your book's out now. You can get that on. Can you buy it on Amazon?
It's available on Amazon. There's a Kindle version, and at this very moment, I'm recording the audiobook version. A lot of people seem to want an audiobook. So at this right now, I'm recording the audiobook as well, which I hope will be out fairly soon.
John Wardley, it's been an absolute pleasure. His new book, Life After Nemesis, is out now. As he said, thank you so much for joining us on Parkcast. We've just got one more thing to ask you.
Just gotta ride it.
So this is Just Gotta Ride It. It's the part of the podcast where we put our guests on the spot and we find out which roller coaster you, as a listener, have just got to make sure you've ticked off. Which one have you got to go and ride in their personal opinion? So, John, we're going to ask you this. I'm putting a caveat on it because I'm sure you'd probably say Nemesis, but I'm not going to allow you to say Nemesis. So any other roller coaster in the world, if there was only one that we should all go and ride, in your opinion, which one is it?
Right, well, it's a no-brainer, and it's Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at any of the Disney parks, and the reason is that non-roller coaster people ride it not realizing it's a roller coaster, and it breaks their fear of riding coasters. People that say, "Oh no, I'm terrified of roller coaster. No way would you get me on a roller coaster," and they ride Big Thunder Mountain. And it's great fun. And then you turn around and say, well, it was a roller coaster. So it breaks their fears. So if there is one way of getting new riders of roller coasters, it's to ride that ride. So that's the one that I would know.
Parkcast, the UK's original theme park podcast.
That's it then, our very first episode back, done and dusted. We hope you enjoyed it, of course, with the legend that is Mr. John Wardley. We're going to have loads more chats like that coming up for you on the podcast. So do subscribe if you enjoyed us. Please give us 5 stars and we'll catch you in the next one.
Parkcast.